All right, folks, welcome back. Just to give you a recap, I read you the foreword of The Green Mile, written by Stephen King, in which we got to look into the mind of the author. He gave us an idea of why he wrote the story itself and why he chose to write it in serial form as opposed to regular novel form as he would normally have written. Then I read you chapters 1 and 2, in which we meet our narrator, Paul Edgecombe, who is the lead guard on E Block in Cold Mountain Prison, E Block, otherwise known as the Green Mile. We learn why it is called the Green Mile. And then he also takes us on a brief tour of that section of the prison. And then in chapter 2, we meet some more of our primary characters, Percy Wetmore being one of them. Percy's going to be a very fun character, pun intended. I don't know if you're going to like Percy too much, and you shouldn't. My opinion, anyway. Anyway, we meet Percy Wetmore. We meet We meet Guard Telwiger, and we also meet the central figure in our story, John Coffey. In chapters 3 and 4, which you will hear today, you will learn the grisly details surrounding the crime that brought John Coffey into our midst and the circumstances surrounding it. As will be the case in each of these sections of the book that we read, there is a quiz attached to the assignment that you will need to work through and complete. My suggestion, as always, will be for you to open the quiz first, take a look at the questions you're going to need to answer, and then take notes on the chapters as you listen to them. My further suggestion would be for you to listen to chapter 3, answer the questions that have to do with chapter 3, to listen to chapter 4, and then answer those questions and make it a little bit easier for you to work through the assignment. As promised, chapters 3 and 4 will be read by our first guest reader, my lovely wife. So without further ado, I bring you The Green Mile, Book 1, The Two Dead Girls, chapters 3 and 4.
Hello, today we're going to be reading the third chapter of The Green Mile, Two Dead Girls, and then we'll take a pause and read chapter 4. You're going to have some trouble with Percy, Harry said, as we walked back up the hall and into my office. Dean Stanton, sort of my third in command, we didn't actually have such things. A situation Percy Wetmore would have fixed up in a flash, was sitting behind my desk, updating the files, a job I never seemed to get around to. He barely looked up as we came in, just gave his little glasses a shove with the ball of his thumb, and dived back into his paperwork. I've been having trouble with that Peckerwood since the day he came here, I said gingerly, pulling my pants away from my crotch and wincing. Did you hear what he was shouting when he brought that big gallet down? Couldn't very well not, Harry said. I was there, you know. I was in the John and heard it just fine, Dean said. He drew a sheet of paper to him, held it up into the light so I could see there was a coffee ring as well as typing on it, and then tossed it into the wastebasket. Dead Man Walking. Must have read that in one of those magazines he liked so much. And he probably had. Percy Wetmore was a great reader of Argosy and Stag and Men's Adventure. There was a prison tale in every issue, it seemed, and Percy read them vividly, like a man doing research. It was like he was trying to find out how to act and thought the information was in those magazines. He'd come just after we did. Anthony Ray, the hatchet killer, and he hadn't actually participated in an execution yet, although he witnessed one from the switch room. He knows people, Harry said. He's connected. You'll have to answer for sending him off the block, and you'll have to answer even harder for expecting him to do some real work. I don't expect it, I said, and I didn't, but I had hopes. Bill Dodge wasn't the sort to let a man just stand around and do the heavy looking on. I'm more interested in the big boy for the time being. Are we going to have trouble with him? Harry shook his head with decision. He was quiet as a lamb at court down there, and Trampagis County, Dean said. He took his little rimless glasses off and began to polish them on his vest. Of course, they had more chains on him than Scrooge saw on Marley's ghost, but he could have kicked up Dickens if he wanted. That's a pun, son. I know, I said, although I didn't. I just hate letting Dean Stanton get the better of me. Big one, ain't he? Dean said. He is, I agreed, monstrous big. Probably have to crank old Sparky up to super bake to fry his ass. Don't worry about old Sparky, I said absently. He makes the big uns little. Dean pinched the sides of his nose, where there were a couple of angry red patches from his glasses, and nodded. Yep, he said. Some truth to that, all right. I asked, do either of you know where he came from before he showed up in Tefton? It was Tefton, wasn't it? Yep, Dean said. Tefton, down in Trampagis County. Before he showed up there and did what he did, no one seems to know. He just drifted around, I guess. You might be able to find out a little more from the newspapers in the prison library, if you're really interested. They probably won't get around to moving those until next week, he grinned. You might have to listen to your little buddy bitching and moaning upstairs, though. I might just go have a peek anyway, I said. And later on that afternoon, I did. The prison library was in back of the building that was going to become the prison auto shop. At least that was the plan. More pork in someone's pocket was what I thought. But the depression was on, and I kept my opinions to myself. The way I should have kept my mouth shut about Percy. But sometimes a man gets him in more trouble than his pecker. My apologies, students. Let me go back a moment. I kept my opinions to myself, the way I should have kept my mouth shut about Percy. But sometimes a man just can't keep it clapped tight. A man's mouth gets him in more trouble than his pecker ever could most of the time. And the auto shop never happened anyway. The next spring, the prison moved 60 miles down the road to Britain. More backroom deals, I reckon. More barrels of pork. Wasn't nothing to me. Administration had gone to a new building on the east side of the yard. The infirmary was being moved. Whose country bumpkin idea it had been to put an infirmary on the second floor in the first place was just another of life's mysteries. The library was still partly stocked, not that it ever had much in it, and standing empty. The old building was a hot clapboard box, kind of shouldered in between A and B blocks. Their bathrooms backed up on it, and the whole building was always swimming with this vague pissy smell, which was probably the only good reason for the move. The library was L-shaped, and not much bigger than my office. I looked for a fan, but they were all gone. It must have been 100 degrees in there, and I could feel that hot throb in my groin where I sat down, sort of like an infected tooth. I know that's absurd, considering the region we're talking about here, but it's the only thing I could compare it to. It got a lot worse during and just after taking a leak, which I had done just before walking over. Oh my. There was one other fellow there, after all. A scrawny old trustee named Gibbons, dozing away in the corner with a Wild West novel in his lap and his hat pulled down over his eyes. The heat wasn't bothering him, nor were the grunts, thumps, and occasional curses from the infirmary upstairs, where it had to be at least 10 degrees hotter, and I hoped Percy Wetmore was enjoying it. I didn't bother him either, but went around to the short side of the L, where the newspapers were kept. I thought they might be going along with the fans, in spite of what Dean had said. They weren't, though, and the business about the Dederick twins was easily enough looked out. It had been front page news from the commission of the crime in June, right through the trial in late August and September. Soon, I had forgotten the heat and the thumps from upstairs and old Gibbons' wheezy snores. The thought of those little 9-year-old girls, their fluffy heads of blonde hair, and their engaging Bopsy twin smiles, in connection with Coffee's hulking darkness was unpleasant but impossible to ignore. Given his size, it was easy to imagine him actually eating them like a giant in a fairy tale. What he had done was even worse, and it was a lucky thing for him that he hadn't just been lynched right there on the riverbank. If that was, you considered waiting to walk the Green Mile and sit in old Sparky's lap lucky. So we're going to pause for right now so you can answer your questions on chapter 3, and then when we come back, we'll read chapter 4.